Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that on all the works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally by thy mercy attain everlasting life. Amen. Would just like to remind everybody that at 1:55 there's going to be a Sask alert, so some of the phones will be going off. Try to mute or shut your phones off, but there's always a few that gets through. Introduction of guests. I recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege today to rise in the Assembly to introduce an international delegation. Seated in your gallery is Her Excellency Adriana Solano Laclay, Ambassador of Costa Rica in Canada, and Michelle Carriolas, Consular Agent in Commercial Affairs, and I hope I pronounced those somewhat correctly. They are seated in the front row. And, Mr. Speaker, they are here for a number of trade-related missions, both with the private sector and with the public sector. I know this is one of their earlier visits, but we're hopeful that they will come back here for more and have further discussions with trade, and would ask that all members of the Assembly welcome them to the Assembly today.
Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly 20 public service employees that are seated in the Speaker's Gallery. They're here today as a part of the parliamentary program for the public service. They've had an opportunity to tour the building, as well as had briefings presented by various officials from Legislative Assembly Services and Executive Council. They'll be observing proceedings here this afternoon, as well as, I believe, having meetings with yourself and members opposite, as well as the government side. Mr. Speaker, participants are employees from the following ministries: Agriculture, Justice and Attorney General, Health, Social Services, Education, Environment, the Public Service Commission, Labour Relations and Workplace Safety, Sask Builds and Procurement, Parks, Culture and Sport, Status of Women Office, Trade and Export Development, and the Public Safety Agency. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask all members to join with me in welcoming these public servants to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to join with the Minister opposite in welcoming this delegation of public servants to their Legislative Assembly. It's always a fun day when we have the parliamentary program here. Always very much enjoy the dialogue that we have after question period, so looking forward to that opportunity later on today. From the bottom of all of our hearts, just let me say a heartfelt thank you for all of the work that you do in the public service every single day. We all, as a province, are indebted to you and benefit from your hard work. I ask all members to join me in welcoming all of them to their legislature.
Recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Request leave for extended introductions.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce some very important guests seated in the Speaker's Gallery and on the floor of the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, last Saturday, November 11th, was Remembrance Day. And as we take time to remember the courage and sacrifice of our servicemen and women, we cannot forget the invaluable contributions women made to the efforts of war in Canada and abroad. This past September, Regina was host to the 2023 Canadian War Brides and Family Association reunion. I was impressed by the stories and the history shared by this reunion as we celebrated the lives and the history of the Canadian war brides in our province. Thousands of brave women who met and married Canadian servicemen during the First and Second World War moved to Canada and helped rebuild our communities after the wars. The presence of these women can be seen and felt in communities across Saskatchewan, and it's an honour to be able to recognize their legacy today. Joining us today, we have Jean Felds, along with their daughter Elaine, grandson Sean, relatives Mr. and Mrs. Doug Rogers. Jean is a war bride, originally from Yorkshire, England, who is in attendance at the reunion this September. Joining Jean and family, we have Heather Salome, who assisted in planning this year's convention in Regina. Harvey Linnan, Brad Harrison with the Royal United Service Incorporated. No stranger to the House is retired Brigadier General Cliff Walker. And daughters of the war brides and executive members of the Canadian War Brides and Families. Mary Angus Yankee, Cheryl Pine, Cheryl Wadden, Anne Lynn Sanich, Judy Beasley. Accompanying them is Bernadette Hamill, Executive Director of the Status of Women. And Mr. Speaker, a name so familiar to us, former MLA, Sask Party Cabinet Minister, June Droughty. June continues to serve our communities as a strong advocate for women and has done amazing work with the Canadian War Brides and Family Association. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in welcoming these esteemed guests today. We thank the War Brides for their contribution to our province and our guests for ensuring their legacy, the lives on our future generations, is remembered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Clacton Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a former member of the Canadian Armed Forces, I'd like to join with the minister opposite in welcoming this delegation to their assembly today. The Canadian War Brides, family members that are involved, the Royal United Services Institute and Group, and Brigadier General Walker. It's so great to see this delegation here today. I want to thank you for your contributions to our province and to our country, and for continuing to share the history that is so important to all of us here, especially as we reflect on Remembrance Day this past week. So I want to ask all members of the Assembly to join me in welcoming this assembly this group to their assembly today.
Recognize the member from Covington-Wadena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the minister responsible for the status of women and welcoming the War Brides, and a special welcome to the former member, the Honourable June Droughty, a member from Kelvington-Wadena constituency, who served honourably from 1995 to 2016, and more importantly for me, she served as an incredible mentor, and I so much appreciate everything she's done, both for the province, but for the constituency and for me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, it's an honor to stand in this chamber and introduce a school group seated in the East Gallery today. It is 17 grade 7 and 8 students from Caswell Community School, who have their teacher with them, Susan Lutkin, and are chaperoned today by Scott Woods Fair, the president of the Prairie Spirit Teachers Association, as well as someone who is no stranger to this chamber, Mr. Speaker, the former MLA from Saskatoon-Meewasin, Ryan Miley. I want to welcome all these students to their legislative assembly. And I look forward to hearing all of your questions after, and I will be speaking about the former leader of our party in a member statement just shortly. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Arm River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to join with the minister and my colleague to welcome Ms. Jean Fells to her legislative assembly here. It was an honor to meet her on the way into the building, actually, just a few moments ago, and learn that we are actually, essentially, we're neighbors. Her being from and spending a considerable amount of her life in Girvan, Saskatchewan, which is truly in the heart geographically of Arm River, and only a few miles away from Chamberlain, my hometown. So I would just like to welcome her and her family here to her legislature.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome all the guests to their Legislative Assembly today, but especially want to join in with the member the current member from Saskatoon-Meewasin in welcoming the former member and my predecessor, Dr. Ryan Miley, to his Legislative Assembly. It's great to see Ryan here today, although a bit strange to see you up there in the East Gallery. And I will note, Mr. Speaker, as sometimes happens with politicians and perhaps Minister Droughty as well, I note that folks who used to serve in this Assembly often seem more rested when we see them up in the gallery. It's great to see both of them. Great to see Ryan continuing to do great work in the community. I know that he is just winding up his book tour with his most recent book, A Healthy Future, and it's great to see you finding time to join here with Abe today. I would invite all members to join me in welcoming Dr. Ryan Miley to his Legislative Assembly and in wishing him and Mali and Abe and Gus all the best in their new adventures. Thank you.
Recognize the Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to make an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
To you and through you, Mr. Speaker, and to all members of this Assembly, I'd like to introduce and welcome some very special guests seated with us today. In the Speaker's Gallery are several staff members from the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation. With us today we have, and if you could just give us a wave as I name you, Daryl Crabb, Executive Director, Brian Alfort, Program Technician, Lubov Horpenchenko, Accountant, Julia Brown, Canadian Conservation Corps, Marley Pyatt, Canadian Conservation Corps, and Courtney Devons, Director of Communications and Marketing. Mr. Speaker, I hope everyone will proudly wear their camo bracelets today and that have been so generously supplied to us by the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation in commemoration of Camo Day, which leads off our Heritage Day today. We're going to hear a little bit more about this day in a member statement. Mr. Speaker, with this, I would like all members to welcome the staff of the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation to their Legislative Assembly. Thanks for joining us.
Recognize a member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you and to you, I'd like to join with the member opposite to welcome Daryl and the crew from the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation, a very important organization in Saskatchewan when it comes to hunting, fishing, conservation. The work that they do across this province is so valuable. As a teacher, Mr. Speaker, I've had the privilege to use or participate in the FINS program in my classroom for the last 5 years maybe, and this is, we get rainbow trout eggs from the fish hatchery at Fort Capel. They hatch in our classroom, and so the students get to see the whole process, and then we take them and release them out at one of the trout ponds, either at Southey or at Buffalo Pound. So with that, I'd like to again welcome them. Happy Camo Day, and I ask all members to join me in welcoming to them to their assembly. You're here. Yeah.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, probably we're all familiar in this House on Bring Your Kid to Work Day. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually doing Bring Your Dad to Work Week. So I'd like to introduce to the Assembly my dad, Randy, who's visiting me from BC this week, and I had the pleasure of joining me in Regina this week just to spend some time here at the Legislature and visit some of his connections. Obviously, you know, it's been spoken many times how important family is to all of us, whatever side of the House you sit on. And I can say that my dad's been definitely one of the most influential people in my life in helping me get to this place where I am today. So I'd ask, Mr. Speaker, all members to welcome my dad, Randy, to the Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join in with the member and leader of the opposition in welcoming the former leader of the opposition, Ryan Miley. I'm not going to make a big fuss about it. I know he doesn't want me to, but I just want to say hello to my friend Ryan, who happens to be chaperoning today, and say that it is sad to be moving on in different ways without your colleagues. Every time someone leaves, it always feels strange to see them back, but you are most welcome here, and I do want to thank you for spending some time with us today. And maybe more importantly, I want to welcome Abraham Miley, who I consider to be a friend after all the time we've spent together on road trips and at events. Although I haven't seen him lately, I did want to embarrass him in front of his class and welcome him specifically. And while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I want to welcome Jason Hicks. Jason is the interim president of COPE 397. He has also, I've had the pleasure of working with him in my constituency office, where he filled a maternity leave position before he was scooped up by the member from Meewasin for full-time employment. So I want to welcome all of these folks to their assembly today and thank them for being here.
Recognize the member from Cut Knife Turtleford.
To you and through you, Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce in your gallery Mr. Gerald Albers. Give us a wave, Gerald. He's not only the Mayor of the City of Lloydminster, but also the President of the Suma City Mayor's Caucus and hosting the MLA reception tonight. Mr. Speaker, I know that my colleague who represents Lloydminster has a very good working relationship with Mr. Albers and the City, and always makes time to have discussions when they have concerns that involve the province. She continues to ensure the City's interests are well represented with the provincial government, as she acts as a very strong advocate on their behalf. I personally have known Mr. Albers for several years, first meeting him in my former role as CEO for the RM of Mervyn, and now in my role as the MLA for Cut Knife Turtleford. In the years that I've known Mayor Albers, I've always found him to be respectful and to the point, as my constituency borders the city, and there have been a few times where we've had some common interests that affect both constituencies. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all members of this Assembly join me in welcoming Gerald Albers to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Utana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet and also extend greetings to Mayor Albers as well as Mayor Greg Dion from Prince Albert. I've certainly enjoyed and benefited greatly from my time visiting with both of these community leaders in their home communities, and am so appreciative of the work that they do and in leading their communities and bringing their concerns forward as part of the Mayor's Caucus and here to the Assembly. I'd like to join with the member opposite in welcoming both Mayor Jerry Albers and Greg Devon to their Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Sask Builds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce, the Mayor of Prince Albert. He's been, I think he's 3 or 4 terms at least now, maybe 5 or 6, and will probably run for another 3 or 4 terms. So, but PA is central to him in his heart, and he works every day, 7 days a week. You never go to a function when you don't see him there. He's there. He's Mr. PA as far as we're concerned. There's lots on the go in Prince Albert right now. Many thanks to the good cooperation that we've had. And we've got new hotels, we've got new apartment buildings, with new arenas, and it's going very well. And I always have to use a line that the Mayor always uses. And so I, once in a while, throw it into a speech of mine. You can't spell paradise without PA. So I welcome him, and I wish all members to welcome Mayor Dion to his legislative chambers. Here, here.
Recognize the member from Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was such an eloquent introduction from our Minister of Sask Builds, but I too would like to welcome Mayor Dion to his Legislative Assembly and thank him for all the good work he's currently doing up in our city of Prince Albert. I ask all members to join me in thanking Mayor Dion to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon, Churchill, Wildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, and on behalf of the member from Saskatoon Willow Grove, I'd like to introduce a group of 20 grade 8 students from Dr. John G. Ignatoff School in Saskatoon. Give us a wave. They are sitting in the West Gallery and are accompanied by their teacher, Heather Reed. I ask all members to join me in welcoming this class to their Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, I recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to call on the government to improve mental health services for northern and rural Saskatchewan. These citizens wish to bring to our attention that the rate of suicide among Indigenous peoples is 3 times higher than that of non-Indigenous people. That suicide rates for Indigenous people living on reserve are twice as high than those living off reserve. And we know that the historical and ongoing impacts of colonization, displacement, and intergenerational trauma are related to these high rates of suicide, and that government has a role to play in destigmatizing mental health and addictions. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to address and work with vulnerable communities in the north and rural areas, and to provide adequate mental health funding and services for northern and rural Indigenous communities. This is signed by individuals from Saskatoon today, Mr. Speaker. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Cut Knife Turtleford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present the following petition. We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. Whereas the Trudeau Liberal NDP coalition carbon tax is one of the main causes of affordability issues and inflation in the nation of Canada, and that the federal government has signed that the carbon tax does affect Canadians differently by issuing an exemption on home heating oil for Atlantic Canadian provinces. Further, that the people of Saskatchewan, 85% of whom rely on natural gas to heat their homes, are unfairly left without support by the Liberal NDP coalition, who continue to drive up the cost of living with their price on carbon. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To call upon the Government of Canada to immediately remove the carbon tax from all home heating costs across Canada, to reduce inflation and drive down the rising cost of living faced by all Canadians from coast to coast. The below undersigned are residents of Warman and Macklin. I do so present. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Mewasin.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present our petition calling on the Government of Saskatchewan to address the cost of living crisis. The undersigned want us to know that inflation is the highest it's been in over 3 decades, that half of Saskatchewan residents were living paycheck to paycheck before transportation and food costs skyrocketed in 2022, that the Sask Party government's 32 new tax and fee hikes makes life more expensive, all while harming struggling industries like tourism, culture, and fitness. While other provinces have acted, the Sask Party continues to ignore the opposition calls for a gas price relief plan. Mr. Speaker, cost of living is the #1 issue ranked by Saskatchewan voters, and they continue to see a government failing to act on this crisis. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to meaningfully address the affordability crisis in Saskatchewan. The undersigned residents live in Regina. I do so present.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present our petition calling on the government to fix the rural healthcare staffing crisis. The undersigned residents would like to bring to our attention the following. Recruitment and retention of healthcare professionals is a particular issue in Saskatchewan's rural healthcare facilities, leading to many emergency room, acute, lab, and X-ray service disruptions. The ongoing pandemic has created burnout and led to early retirements and resignations, which has rippling effects for small cities and towns. And I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that burnout is a real and serious issue facing healthcare professionals across this province. We hear it from friends of mine who work as healthcare professionals, but from unions and many, many people working in this industry. Mr. Speaker, I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to fix the rural healthcare crisis. Mr. Speaker, the signatories today reside in Regina and Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in the House once again to present a petition calling for the improvement of labour laws in Saskatchewan. Those who have signed this petition wish to bring to our attention the following: that even after the October 1st increase, Saskatchewan's minimum wage remains the lowest in Canada at $14 an hour. As well, the official opposition has twice introduced paid sick leave legislation since the onset of the pandemic, calling for a minimum of 10 paid sick days each year and 14 days during a public health crisis. As well, paid sick leave has been proven to save employers money while making workplaces healthier and safer for all workers. 71% of workers in Canada have experienced workplace violence and harassment, and much more needs to be done to ensure that workplaces in Saskatchewan are harassment-free. Mr. Speaker, we have a private member's bill before the floor right now. It's Bill number 613. We do hope that the minister takes a look at those provisions seriously and considers passage. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to improve conditions for Saskatchewan workers by passing legislation to increase the minimum wage, guarantee paid sick leave, limit non-disclosure agreements which could silence survivors of workplace harassment, and require employers to track and report incidents of violence and harassment in the workplace. Those who have signed this petition today come from Weyburn. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Utana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling on the government to protect Saskatchewan's water supply. The undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan wish to bring to your attention the following: that water is essential for human health, recreation, the health of our ecosystems, and our economy. That the research from the University of Regina shows the water quality of Saskatchewan lakes is getting worse. The provincial auditor has pointed out that Saskatchewan's lack of a wetland policy negatively impacts water quality, and that significant work remains to better regulate drainage. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the past summer, over 2,200 Saskatchewan residents sent letters to the Premier asking him to put in place a wetland conservation policy in advance of a stewardship framework for agriculture. I will read the prayer as follows. We request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan work to actively protect Saskatchewan waters from current and future threats to our valuable water supply. This petition is signed by the residents of Fort Qu'Appelle. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petition statements by members. I recognize the member from Melville Southcoast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Hunting, Fishing and Trapping Heritage Day in Saskatchewan. In the fall of 2009, our government passed a Hunting, Fishing and Trapping Heritage Act, which designates every 15th of November as a day to celebrate the special role that these activities have played in the lives of generations of people. With more than 250,000 Saskatchewan residents participating in hunting, fishing and trapping every year, the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation is proud to encourage the celebration of Saskatchewan Hunting, Trapping and Fishing Heritage Day, otherwise known as Camo Day. The abundant fish and wildlife in this province are due to the joint contributions of licensed hunters, anglers and trappers who are on the ground supporting provincial conservation activities. Without these activities, our province would not enjoy many of the iconic sceneries that we have come to call home. The Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation is inviting individuals and businesses to participate in honouring the individuals impacting conservation and raise awareness around their contributions to fish, wildlife and habitat conservation by wearing camouflage during our 2023 Camo Day celebration. On behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan, thank you to the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation for their work in conservation and educating the public on the realities of hunting and fishing in our province, and thank you to the thousands of hunters, anglers and trappers who continue to responsibly carry out their favourite pastimes right here in Saskatchewan.
Recognize a member from Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, October 7th was the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. More than 1,200 Israelis were killed by Hamas, and 240 Israeli civilians remain hostages. To our fellow Saskatchewan residents from the Jewish community, we grieve this tragic loss with you, and we reiterate our call for an immediate release of all hostages. And Mr. Speaker, we see a growing humanitarian catastrophe today in Gaza. More than 2 million people are lacking basic necessities as the civilian death toll continues to climb. More than 11,000 Palestinians, over 4,600 of whom are children, have been killed. These are atrocities. To our fellow Saskatchewan residents from the Palestinian, Arab, Muslim communities, we grieve this tragic loss with you, and we join in calls for an immediate ceasefire and for free flow of humanitarian aid to provide medical supplies, food, fuel, and water to Gazans. Here at home, we hear from community members of increased rise in hate and discrimination, whether it be anti-Semitic, anti-Palestinian, or Islamophobic hate. Hate in all of its forms has no place in Saskatchewan. For many in our province, the realities of this war are all too real. This is a time to call for unity, a time to grieve together, and a time to stand together in solidarity. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon, Churchill-Wildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many Canadian families and communities count themselves richer for the contributions of the thousands of war brides from both the First and Second World Wars who made Canada their home. There were an estimated 48,000 women who met and married Canadian servicemen during the Second World War. We salute this remarkable group of women who fell in love, followed their hearts, and made a new home in this country. We can only imagine how heart-wrenching it would be to say goodbye to family and friends and build a new life in a place you have never been, facing so many unknowns. That takes strength, determination, and perseverance. Mr. Speaker, today we have some family members of war brides joining us and members from the Canadian War Brides and Families Association. The 12th Annual War Brides Conference took place right here in Regina in September of this year. Our government is proud to support the legacy of the Canadian War Brides by providing grant funding for a memorial pedestal to be placed in Victoria Square Park this year. We commend the efforts of the Canadian War Brides and Families Organization in ensuring that these resilient women, who are part of Saskatchewan's foundation, continue to be recognized for their vision, courage, and leadership. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to invite all members of this Assembly to join me in thanking the war brides and their families for their work and vital contributions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to highlight the incredible work done by someone who needs little introduction in this chamber, Dr. Ryan Miley, who served the people of Saskatchewan as leader of the official opposition, leader of the Saskatchewan NDP, and MLA for Saskatoon-Meewasin. This summer, myself and several of my colleagues from Regina and Saskatoon had the opportunity to attend the book tour of A Healthy Future, Lessons from the Front Lines of a Crisis. It highlights the provincial and federal responses to the COVID-19 pandemic with reflections on how to improve our public health care systems in order to create a healthier and more equitable future for the people in this province. In it, Dr. Miley not only reflects on the COVID-19 experience in Saskatchewan, but also speaks to the ways in which we can improve our public health care system. I am honored to speak to the important work that Dr. Miley continues to do for our province before, during, and since his time as our party leader and as MLA for Saskatoon-Meewasin. Even outside the legislature, Dr. Miley continues to be a fierce advocate for his provincial community. I ask all members to join with me in congratulating Dr. Ryan Miley on his accomplishment of publishing his second book and thanking him for his dedicated service to the people of our province. Thank you so much.
Recognize the member from Martensville-Water.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to recognize Nurse Practitioner Week, November 12th to 18th. Mr. Speaker, the number of nurse practitioners practicing in Saskatchewan has increased by over 236% since 2007. This week, we celebrate more than 300 nurse practitioners providing high-quality primary, acute, and specialty health services across the province. Through Saskatchewan's Health Human Resources Action Plan, We are working to support nurse practitioners in the province by expanding their scope of practice, allowing them to admit and discharge to hospitals and provide comprehensive care to patients in long-term care, offering nurse practitioner students the final clinical placement bursary to assist with their last year of schooling, offering loan forgiveness for nurse practitioners that choose to work in smaller communities, which was just expanded to an additional 5 communities, as noted in the throne speech, offering up to $40,000 in relocation granting for nurse practitioners entering a small community, offering up to $50,000 to recruit nurse practitioners to a rural location. Since 2007, Mr. Speaker, we've increased nurse practitioner program seats by 50%. These investments are paying off, because this year's fall of 2023 convocation was the largest class of USask nurse practitioner graduates from Saskatchewan, the second largest class of nurse practitioner graduates to date, as well as the largest number of self-declared Indigenous nurse practitioner grads in college history. Please join me in expressing appreciation to all nurse practitioners working here in Saskatchewan.
Recognize the member from Kootenai-Turtleford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isaiah Mamer from Wilkie, a recent Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee recipient, has done it again. On May 30th of this year, Isaiah qualified to be on the U21 roster for Volleyball Canada. Isaiah was part of a team that included 15 other players from Canada that stayed, competed, and trained in Ottawa to be ready to compete in the July tournaments. Isaiah played with and competed against players who were not only the best in Canada, but the best in the world, Mr. Speaker. The Volleyball Canada's team played in the Norseca Men's U21 Pan American Cup in La Habana, Cuba, in early July, placing third in the event, and then off to the FIVB Men's U21 World Championships in Manama, Bahrain, in mid-July, placing 11th in the world. Mr. Speaker, Isaiah expressed gratitude to all those who have helped him in his journey and career goals, including his coaches, teammates, mentors, role models, and family. Isaiah was also named 2022 Saskatchewan Volleyball 18U Male Athlete of the Year. In January of 2023, I had the distinct pleasure on presenting Isaiah a Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal. Isaiah is not only an incredible athlete, but also continually gives back to his community. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members of this Assembly join me in congratulating Isaiah on his volleyball pursuits and wish him well as he continues to push towards his dreams and goals. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan-Riversdale.
It's another great day in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I had the pleasure of joining my colleagues and the Minister of Trade and Export Development and the Black Fox Farm and Distillery and 9 Mile Brewing reception last night. I'd like to thank John Cote and Barb Stefanishin Cote, co-owners of Black Fox Farm and Distillery, as well as Garrett Peterson and Sean Moen, co-founders of 9 Mile Legacy Brewing Company. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize these two innovative companies for their creativity and worldwide reach. Black Fox is one of Saskatchewan's only Type 1 distilleries, meaning they produce 100% of their products on site. They have won gold and master level awards and are continuously looking to expand their reputation globally. Our province is dependent on international and interjurisdictional exports, and Black Fox shows the true importance of trade in our province. Black Fox's commitment to sustainability is a core value of theirs, as they recycle 95% of the water they use. Mr. Speaker, we are so excited that they will be joining us at COP28 this year to share their sustainability story even further. Good job. 9 Mile Legacy Brewing Company is located right in the heart of Saskatoon-Riversdale, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with both of them by connecting them to new markets and partnerships with international offices. I'd like all members to join me in thanking them for their great work. Thank you.
Question carried. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is lurching from crisis to crisis in healthcare. From ambulances to diagnostics to surgeries, people can't get the care they need when they need it. And nowhere is that more clear than at the St. Paul's emergency room. More than 100 healthcare workers wrote to the Premier demanding action to long-standing issues in that hospital. Why did the Premier have to be publicly shamed through a letter before there was any action taken to address these long-standing concerns?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker. Yeah, we did receive a letter from a number of folks that are working in our healthcare facilities, Mr. Speaker, and do appreciate that. The Minister of Health has discussed with the SHA, and I believe the SHA was out yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Communicating with the public, Mr. Speaker, and with the Saskatchewan Health Authority staff that are offering the services, what they're in the process of doing today to address some of the pressures that we're seeing, not just at St. Paul's and Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker, but many of our healthcare centres across the province, Mr. Speaker, what they are looking at doing over the course of the next number of weeks, Mr. Speaker, and what they're doing over the longer term, over the course of the next number of months to ensure that we're able to address the pressures that come through the front door of our healthcare facilities across the province, Mr. Speaker. Those include additional beds, they include it includes reallocating staff, it includes hiring even additional staff, Mr. Speaker, in addition to what we have already committed to hiring in our healthcare facilities today, Mr. Speaker. And so credit to the SHA for taking quick action, swift action, but also communicating what they are doing with the general public across the province, as well as to those that are working in our facilities.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the nurses and the healthcare workers have some pretty straightforward solutions to the crisis in healthcare today. End the short staffing, stop treating patients in the hallway, and listen to healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, none of those will be addressed in that plan that was announced yesterday. Why not? And when will this tired and out-of-touch government actually listen to the frontline healthcare workers and implement the solutions that they've been asking for months?
Recognize the Premier.
One of the primary asks was for the addition of beds and staff, Mr. Speaker. That is actually exactly what the Saskatchewan Health Authority was speaking to yesterday. I believe the CEO, Andrew Will, was out and talked about the 84 additional beds that are being staffed in Saskatoon, the additional emergency department staffing that is being provided at St. Paul's Emergency Department, 3 additional ambulances being added to the rotation, Mr. Speaker. These are precisely some of the asks that were placed by the staff in the letter that was provided, Mr. Speaker, and it's precisely some of the commitments that the CEO of the Saskatchewan Health Authority had made yesterday as he communicated that to Saskatchewan people.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, despite those lines from the Premier, it is more and more clear every day that this government is refusing to listen to frontline healthcare workers. Now, the Sask Party cooked up a plan over the weekend, but they're ignoring the solutions that healthcare workers have been calling on for months and years. Let's take the nursing task force. Registered nurses in this province want to work with the government on a nursing task force to fix the crisis in our healthcare system. They called for this back in March, and they called for it again on the day of the throne speech. Why won't the Premier just say yes to the nurses and strike this task force today?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member opposite for the question. Mr. Speaker, this government takes the work and the value, very much values the work being done by nurses across our province. Myself, the Minister of Rural and Remote Health, previous Ministers of Health have had a number of opportunities to have engagement with the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses and with frontline healthcare providers, Mr. Speaker, and meeting directly with nurses that are working on the front lines, Mr. Speaker, to not only hear from them directly as to what the challenges, some of the pressures that they are facing on the front lines in our healthcare facilities, Mr. Speaker, but also in addition to that, to work with them on solutions. So, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to engage with SUN and other organizations, other healthcare providers across Saskatchewan to make sure we're delivering the best possible healthcare we can for the people of this province.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it shouldn't come as any surprise to that minister that nurses in this province are not feeling very much valued by this tired and out-of-touch government. In fact, Mr. Speaker, they're letting so many people down while they're wasting public money hand over fist. Last month, we were joined by Evelyn Harper, who was evicted from Sask housing. Evelyn checked herself into the Sunrise Motel at a rate of $132 a night. But when the hotel found out that the government was going to pay the cost, the rate for that room jumped from $132 to $200. Mr. Speaker, that's a jump of 51%. Does the Premier think that it's okay for hotels to charge 50% more when they find out that taxpayers are footing the bill?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in this particular case, and in many cases when there is an emergency situation and shelters might be full and there's not an appropriate place to put individuals in a temporary situation, we do use hotels on occasion. As time goes on all across the province, Mr. Speaker, our first priority is to have folks in a warm and safe place to stay. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the case that happens across the province all the time. In terms of this particular situation, this case has been resolved in terms of finding a place for Evelyn. She's currently in a Sask housing unit, so I'm glad to hear that side of things, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the billing, Mr. Speaker, we can certainly look into it. I think it had something to do with the ministry doesn't pay deposits, and in this case, when the individual checked in, they were asked for that, so it may have been restated, Mr. Speaker, but we will continue to use hotels when needed. I would note that hotel usage has declined over the last few years.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this case raises serious questions about the management of public funds and the transparency and actions of that Sask Party government. Evelyn shared the Ministry of Social Services requisition forms and receipts from her stay at the Sunrise Motel, a hotel that is owned by a member of this Legislative Assembly, the member for Regina Northeast. When she first checked in, she was charged a damage deposit of $200 and a nightly rate of $119 plus tax, $132 per night, taxes included. Then, once the staff of the Sunrise Motel found out that Social Services was paying the cost, the price went up to $169 per night and then $200 per night, all for the same room, in the same hotel, for the same guest, who had paid a damage deposit, Mr. Speaker. The only thing that changed was who was fitting the bill. Is the Minister of Social Services not concerned that this hotel jacked up the price when Social Services was paying the cost?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in a general sense, we only use hotels when necessary. I would note, and I believe the member said, that this individual checked into a hotel on her own, and then previously, and then paid that damage deposit. And then when Social Services became involved, Child and Family in this case, that because we don't pay direct deposit, there was restating, Mr. Speaker. But we can certainly look into this, Mr. Speaker. We don't have standing contacts with any hotels, and Ministry works to get the best possible rate. Those rates fluctuate from time to time based on what's happening in the market. If there's an exhibition or a Grey Cup or something like that, Mr. Speaker, or different weekend, for example, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, I think what this is really about, unfortunately, is the NDP going after an honourable member, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is this member is not involved in the day-to-day decisions at all.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Evelyn is just one person who stayed at the Sunrise Motel while the bill was paid by the Ministry of Social Services using public dollars. Again, she paid a damage deposit I might add, she still doesn't have back. But she's not the only one, Mr. Speaker. I see cases all the time in my MLA office where people are put up in hotels at public expense. Are those charges being inflated too? We don't know. How much money in total has the government paid to this hotel owned by a member of the Sask Party caucus since 2020? What nightly rates were charged? If the minister doesn't have that answer today, will he commit to tabling it tomorrow?
Here, here.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
In terms of hotel use, Mr. Speaker, we do have hotels that we frequently use, and no contracts, as I mentioned before, and that could be for emergency situations. It could be for someone who may have been banned from a hotel, is in town for medical appointments, whatever it may be, Mr. Speaker, in an emergency situation. In this case, it worked out that we were able to temporarily house somebody in a hotel and then move them on to more permanent housing, and I'm glad that that has happened for Ms. Harper. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the exact amount of hotel uses. I know it has steadily come down because of the investments we've made on the emergency shelter side, the complex needs emergency shelter side, as well as supportive living that we've been able to bring forward, and I was able to do that along with the Minister for Addictions to be able to help our most vulnerable people here in our province. And so, Mr. Speaker, that usage of hotels has come down as we've increased supports.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
I think I'll just ask that question again because I'm not sure if we got an answer or commitment from the minister. How much money in total has the government paid to this hotel, which is owned by a Sask Party member, since 2020, every year since 2020? What nightly rates were charged? And if he doesn't have that information today, will he commit to providing it to this Legislative Assembly tomorrow? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have the breakdowns of which hotels are used and for how many nights, etc. I do know that trend is coming down. We spend about, in 23-24, my understanding is about $850,000 on hotel stays in the province. Again, that's come down with the more supports we've been able to come up with, Mr. Speaker. But again, I think this is really about the NDP going after an honourable member in this House, Mr. Speaker. These are serious and unproven allegations. I'm certainly a little I'm disappointed but not surprised by the NDP would come up with this line of attack, Mr. Speaker. We're all honourable members in this House, and you know that is what we expect from all members in this House and in every case.
Here, here.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
I couldn't agree more that these are serious allegations, Mr. Speaker. These raise serious questions, and I've asked the minister to make undertakings to this Legislative Assembly, to provide facts to this Legislative Assembly, to table those facts, and he has refused for a second time to do that, Mr. Speaker. We're opposed to the total lack of oversight of these public dollars being mismanaged and wasted. When Evelyn checked in, she was paying $132 per night for her room. Had Evelyn continued to pay out of pocket, that rate wouldn't have changed for her 15-night stay. But when the staff learned that the people of, I do know that, the hotel told Evelyn that is the case. But when the staff learned that the people of Saskatchewan were picking up the tab, the price went up over 50%. This isn't right. The public deserves answers, and the minister is on record refusing to table those answers. Why doesn't the ministry have any procedures in place? Will he commit to tabling the policies of his ministries relevant to hotel stays? Here.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, we can certainly look into if we have this information within the ministry, Mr. Speaker. I have mentioned we spend about $850,000, and that fluctuates throughout the year, and particularly in the wintertime. Those numbers do go up, and we are key here in all these situations to keep people safe and comfortable and warm, and minimize the disruption in their lives certainly as much as possible. The ministry, I know, works to get the best rates possible. We don't have standing contracts, but again, those rates fluctuate. Anybody know who's tried to book a hotel on weekends or at certain times of the year? I don't know in this case exactly, but Mr. Speaker, hotel rates do fluctuate from time to time, Mr. Speaker. But again, disappointing. The NDP is imputing an honourable member of this House.
Here, here.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the question was, will the minister table all policies around placing social services clients in hotels? If he doesn't have them today, will he commit to tabling them tomorrow?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't say on the floor of the Assembly if we have the exact breakdowns. We'll certainly look into that. I don't think tomorrow would be reasonable in terms of 3 years of information the member just asked for. That might be a little difficult to do, Mr. Speaker, but you know, we'll endeavour to look into it, Mr. Speaker, and try and get that information. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, we do use hotels in emergency situations. We do spend a certain amount of dollars in that area. Of course, we spend a lot of public dollars on looking after our most vulnerable in our emergency shelters. We've been able to increase those amount of beds in our province, and you know, we're going to have more announcements in the near future about how we've been able to work with municipalities, work with our CBO sector to be able to increase supports for those that need it immediately and longer term for our most vulnerable people.
Hear, hear.
Here, here.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we're not opposed to finding emergency housing for people in crisis, certainly not. We are opposed to a total lack of transparency and oversight when it comes to public management of funds. Mr. Speaker, the question for the minister was, will he table the ministry policies around hotel use? I'm not sure if we heard a clear answer to that. He says he needs more time to go through the receipts in terms of what the ministry has contracted with the Sunrise Motel. What does he think will be a reasonable timeline, and will he commit to table those numbers when he has them? Whenever he thinks, you know, I don't want to be too ambitious in my requests, will he commit to tabling those when he has them, Mr. Speaker? We need some clear answers. The ministry puts hundreds of people up in hotels every year. This has been going on for years. We know that they've spent nearly $1 million on hotels through the income assistance strain. We'd like to know what they spend globally in the Ministry of Social Services on hotels yearly.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, for these estimates types questions, we'll endeavour to look at what we have. If we do have that exact breakdown, and then you know, share that information if we do have it, Mr. Speaker. Again, we're working hard to increase the amount of spaces we have for some of our most vulnerable citizens, not only on the emergency side, the complex emergency side, complex needs emergency side, supportive living, using Sask housing units to be able to provide some of these supports out there in our province, all across our province. There'll be more announcements in the coming days as we work with our municipal partners, our CBO partners, to continue to help individuals who rely on the ministry, as well as all the people out there who help those people, as well as sometimes in emergency situations using a hotel.
Yes.
Here, here.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Evelyn Harper isn't the only one who has been put up at the Sunrise Motel by Social Services. I'm told the ministry regularly directs clients to the Sunrise Motel, a hotel that is owned by a Sask Party MLA. Can the minister confirm that this is a hotel that the Ministry of Social Services regularly contracts with? Can the minister confirm that can he confirm how many social services clients have been put in this hotel each year for the last 5 years, and what nightly rates were charged? How much public money has been spent housing vulnerable people at the Sunrise Motel? Again, if the minister doesn't have that information today, will he commit to providing it tomorrow or tabling it as soon as possible?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of what hotels in general the ministry uses from day to day or right across the province. They have several that they frequently use. I imagine in this case, wouldn't surprise me if this is the only case that the ministry would use to house someone in a temporary state, but I don't know that. I don't have that information here with me in the House. We can take a look to see if we do have those breakdowns. But again, Mr. Speaker, we're working hard to help individuals with whatever challenges they may have in their lives. Part of that is hotel usage, Mr. Speaker. The rates may fluctuate, as we all know, Mr. Speaker. And again, we can look into this particular stay, Mr. Speaker. But again, it's unfortunate that the reputation is being put into question for an honourable member of this Assembly.
Here, here. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, the minister says he doesn't know if the ministry regularly contracts with the Sunrise Motel or if this is the only case where he has. So this is an easy one. Will the minister undertake to go back today and find out if the ministry regularly contracts with the Sunrise Motel and provide an answer to this Legislative Assembly tomorrow? Hear, hear.
Recognize Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of standing contracts, there are, to my knowledge and my understanding, just heard about this case a few hours ago, or this entire situation. There's no contracts with hotels, and there are ones that the ministry regularly uses. And but I don't know the exact details or the exact breakdowns. We'll look and see if we have that information that we can share publicly.
Here, here.
Here, here.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, time and time again, this tired and out-of-touch government has shown through their actions how little they care about safeguarding public money. Saskatchewan people work hard for their money. They don't want to see public dollars wasted because of this government's mismanagement. Right. The combination of the steep rate increase and the fact that the hotel in question is owned by a government member raises serious questions, questions to which we, the opposition, as well as the public, the Saskatchewan people, deserve answers to. As MLAs, we are held to a higher standard, and we have a duty to maintain the confidence and trust of the public in government affairs, Mr. Speaker. Public dollars shouldn't be wasted on inflated hotel costs. They should be used to provide housing to vulnerable people. Doesn't the minister understand how wrong it is to stick Saskatchewan people with the bill for inflated hotel costs?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, my understanding once again is this member is not involved in the day-to-day operations of this particular hotel. The ministry works to get the best rates possible in general. However, rates do fluctuate, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the housing side, we work very hard to improve units. We're doing that every day. We have several programs that we are able to increase the amount of units that are under construction, particularly those that are needed for supportive housing. That work will continue. We work hard to work with third-party partners to make best use of Sask housing units, and that work continues each and every day.
Here, here.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, new numbers from the coroner's office paint a picture of the overdose crisis in Saskatchewan. It's a picture of death and loss impacting so many families. 202 confirmed overdose deaths and 193 suspected and still under investigation. At this rate, we will surpass the record number of deaths in 2021 of 403. These are real Saskatchewan people whose lives matter. Hundreds of families whose lives will forever be changed by the death of a loved one. And it doesn't have to be this way. The government could step up and provide resources that are needed to keep people alive. When will this government finally bring forward the resources in an evidence-based plan to ensure that 2024 will not be another record-breaking year?
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the plan was announced a couple of months ago now. It's a 5-year plan for mental health and addictions. It's funded by almost $50 million, Mr. Speaker, and this plan is focused on treatment and recovery of individuals who are battling addiction. We are more than doubling the number of addictions treatment spaces in this province, Mr. Speaker. We are making it easier for individuals to access those treatment spaces, and when they are in treatment, Mr. Speaker, we are focused on recovery-oriented system of care, which is meeting these individuals where they're at, providing them the care that they need so that we can get them on a healthy path to recovery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministerial statements, introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees, orders of the day.
Government orders, second readings. Item number 1, the Honourable Minister to move second reading of Bill number 150, the Securities Saskatchewan Investors Protection Amendment Act 2023.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will now move second reading of the Securities Saskatchewan Investors Protection Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, capital markets play a crucial role in our economy, but to maintain a healthy capital markets industry, a strong regulatory system is required. Proper regulation ensures the integrity of the industry and protects investors. This bill contains 3 sets of changes to the Securities Act 1988, which will help achieve these goals. First, the changes grant designated dispute resolution service providers the authority to make binding decisions in certain disputes between investors and registered firms. This change is based on recommendations of the Canadian Securities Administrators and will substantially harmonize provisions across Canadian jurisdictions. In practice, the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, or OBSI, is expected to be designated under the Act to carry out this role. Currently, OBSI can make non-binding recommendations in disputes between firms and investors. And if a firm refuses to comply, the only recourse for OBSI is to publish the refusal. If an investor has the necessary resources, it is possible to take further action at one's own expense, including civil litigation. However, consumer advocates and international reviewers have criticized the lack of enforceability of OBSI's decisions. Granting binding decision-making authority to OBSI will level the playing field between investors and firms who are in dispute and increase access to fair resolutions for investors. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the changes increase the maximum administrative penalty for persons or companies who violate Saskatchewan securities laws from $100,000 to $1 million. And this increase will align Saskatchewan with most other Canadian jurisdictions and better achieve the goal of deterring contraventions of securities laws. Finally, the changes grant the Securities Commission authority to take additional measures to ensure compliance with securities laws. For example, this authority could be used to order the closure of websites operated and used by entities that contravene Saskatchewan securities laws, or extend an order to third parties, such as social media sites, to remove information or advertisements of users who contravene Saskatchewan securities law from their platforms. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to move second reading of the Securities Amendment Act 2023.
It has been moved that Bill number 150 be now read a second time. Assembly ready for the question. I recognize member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to rise today and enter into the debate on Bill number 150, the Securities Saskatchewan Investors Protection Amendment Act. I appreciated the minister's opening comments, her second reading speech outlining the provisions within the legislation, and in particular emphasizing the importance of proper regulation of this industry, as well as protection of investors, something that we very much support and endorse as well. She mentioned in her speech that the recommendation, or that the provisions laid out in this Amendment Act come from recommendations from stakeholders and the public more generally. Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to delve into this piece of legislation a little bit more and reaching out to stakeholders as well to get their feedback. I know I also have several colleagues who are looking forward to entering to the debate on this piece of legislation. In order to facilitate all of that good work, I'm prepared now to move to adjourn debate on Bill number 150.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. It's pleasure Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 1, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 138, the Workers' Compensation Extending Firefighter Coverage Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Vermette.
Recognized member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To enter in today briefly with respect to Bill number 138, the Workers' Compensation Extending Firefighter Coverage Amendment Act 2023, Mr. Speaker. I'll speak to a specific portion of this legislation. I know there's some other aspects within it that our Labour critic and our team is involved in consultation and review to make sure that this is in the best interests of firefighters across the province. But certainly with respect to the additional cancer coverages that are extended through this legislation, this is good news and something that this opposition and the professional firefighters and fire chiefs have pushed and paramedics have pushed for a very long period of time in this Assembly, Mr. Speaker. So we're very pleased to see this action on this front. We've pushed for this coverage, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to commend the incredible leaders across Saskatchewan that serve firefighters and paramedics in Saskatchewan. I want to give a special shout out to Lloyd Zwack, the president of the Saskatchewan Professional Firefighters, for he and his organization's relentless leadership on this front. And I want to give a local shout out to Local 181 President Tyler Packham, President of the Regina Firefighters, for his voice and his courage and leadership on this front, as well as sharing personal experiences courageously on this front, Mr. Speaker. When we look at firefighters and paramedics, these are folks that serve and sacrifice and put themselves at risk. Mr. Speaker, they're responding to some of the greatest challenges and tragedies within this province, Mr. Speaker. They're running into danger and providing care for all of us, Mr. Speaker. They're on a day-to-day basis seeing the horrors with respect to a broken mental health and addiction system in the province, Mr. Speaker, and the realities, the hard realities that so many families are suffering on this front, Mr. Speaker. And of course, they're also putting themselves at risk of cancer through their work, Mr. Speaker, and keeping us safe. It's only the right thing to do when we know that this work puts these firefighters and paramedics at risk in this way with respect to cancer, to then make sure that that cancer is covered, to make sure that we have the backs of those that have our backs day in, day out in communities across Saskatchewan, whether that be the professional firefighters, whether that be volunteer firefighters, whether that be those fighting wildfires courageously, or those down on the prairies, Mr. Speaker. These emergency responders deserve our commitment, Mr. Speaker. So I've been pleased to work with the firefighters on this front in this community to push for this expansion, Mr. Speaker. I'll remind government that there are some other very important calls, and I won't get into them all here today, but some very important other calls that the firefighters have made that would improve public safety and that would improve supports for those that are doing such important work for all of us, Mr. Speaker. So to all those that serve in emergency services, all those firefighters, all those paramedics, of course, all those police, everyone else, Mr. Speaker, I say thank you. I say thank you for what you do within this province. This legislation with respect to the expansion of cancer coverages is an important step. It's an important way to extend support for those that are putting their lives at risk while they save ours, Mr. Speaker. With that being said, I will adjourn debate on Bill number 138, or I'll move to adjourn debate on Bill number 138, the Workers' Compensation Extending Firefighter Coverage Amendment Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on on Bill number 138. Is that agreed?
Government orders, adjourn debates. Item number 2, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 140. This Miscellaneous Statutes Repeal Act 2023. Mr. Clark.
I recognize a member from Regina Coronation Park.
It's my pleasure to stand on debate for Bill 140, Miscellaneous Status Repeal Act 2023. A blast from the past to see Act passed before any of us were elected or even born. Good time to reflect on issues that still resonate today. Faith-based education, struggling for funds, wildlife, not much the government commitment to conservation and home ownership, and Saskatchewan worst in nation on mortgage defaults. Mr. Speaker, all critic on the Bill 140, Miscellaneous Status Appeal Act 2022, will be talking in detail after consultation with the stakeholders. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will adjourn the debate on Bill 140, the Miscellaneous Status Repeal Act 2023.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill 140. Is that agreed?
Government orders, adjourn debates. Item number 3, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 141, the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Saar.
I recognize a member from Saskatoon, Lieutenant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet entering into debate on Bill number 141, the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023, and my pronouns are she, her. So this is a housekeeping kind of a bill focused on various acts that will fix some of the spelling, grammar, and cross-referencing mistakes. It replaces references to Her Majesty the Queen with the Crown, and changes any mention of his or her to their, so that it is gender neutral. I think has been mentioned already with the passing of Her Majesty. This has been a good opportunity to take the opportunity for more neutral references and updating the language with the passing of the sovereign. And it just also happens to be Trans Awareness Week from November 13th to 19th. And I thought it was sort of a good time maybe to touch on that a little bit with the changes that are presented here in the Amendment Act to be less gendered and refer to their pronouns. I think that there's been a lot of confusion in the past about what is the difference between identity and expression. Certainly, now is always a good time to show allyship with the trans community, and I think that this bill is pointing the way, certainly in terms of how it is sort of normalizing the sharing of pronouns and removal of sort of that gendered language that we see here in this bill. I think there's so much more we could be doing to further greater understanding, greater allyship. With the materials for Trans Awareness Week, it speaks to the opportunity now to show up and speak up and support those in the trans community through stories and bring to light social and systemic barriers. Certainly the changes in this language is an example of that in terms of some of those systemic barriers that refer to one gender or the other in a sort of stereotypical fashion. It also talks about the need as allies to do our research, to listen to transgender voices, understand the intersectionality of the issues that they face, normalize sharing of pronouns, as I've done here today, and being mindful of where that gendered language is showing up. And then finally, challenging transphobic jokes. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to make mention of that, given the content of this Amendment Act and the fact that it is, in fact, Trans Awareness Week. And I know that our critic will do their due diligence and ensure that this is an act that is keeping to those housekeeping amendments. And with that, I will move to adjourn debate on Bill number 141.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill number 141. Is that agreed? Right.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 4, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 142, the Miscellaneous Statutes Utility Line Locates Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Witherspoon.
I recognize the member from Regina Coronation Park.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's my pleasure and my honor to stand on the debate of Bill 142, the Miscellaneous Status Utility Line Locate Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, we all know that safety is important for private citizen and Crown employees as well. It's very rare that we see the government worry about that consumers' protection at the cost of making it harder for the Crown to do the businesses. Government should have to be doing a lot better. Good to have consistency among all the Crowns, avoiding any confusion. We love our Crowns, and that's why we are so disappointed that the SOS party is running that into the ground. Our critic for Bill 142 will debate in detail after consultation with stakeholders. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will adjourn the debate on Bill 142.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill number 142. Is that agreed? Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 5, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 143, the Child Care Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Ritchie.
I recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to enter the debate on Bill 143, the Child Care Amendment Act. You know, we come into this into this debate with the reality that 92% of young children in Saskatchewan live in a child care desert. We saw that number come to us from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives earlier in 2023. So it is good to see an initiative that addresses child care. It's disappointing to see, Mr. Speaker, that the government has only created 378 of their targeted 6,000 new spaces for child care across this province in year 1. I can't do that math in my head real quick to what percentage that is, but I would say it's dismal, Mr. Speaker. So we do hope that the government will put some energy and some funds into making sure that their next year's target are reached in a much more robust way, because this is important to working families, Mr. Speaker. We hear this across the province. I definitely hear this in my constituency, where people don't have access to childcare, whether that is as a parent and not being able to get their child into affordable childcare. I know a friend of mine who has a new baby, a 1-year-old baby, looking to go back to work, and they are looking for childcare. They are 1,900th on the waiting list, Mr. Speaker. 1,900 people before them to get into this child care centre. It's unacceptable. But it's also difficult for communities, and this is a rural Saskatchewan issue, where we see communities clamoring to try and create childcare spaces in their community. I know the village of Edenwold has been trying for years to get a childcare centre in their community. They've applied to get childcare spaces and continue to be put off, continue to be put off, continue to be put off, even though there is a distinct need for childcare in that community, Mr. Speaker. So we do need robust action on this childcare front across the province. $10 a daycare or $10 a day daycare is a fantastic step forward. The affordability of daycare when it isn't $10 a day is an incredible barrier for families. I know it was for my family when my twins were born. To have 2 small children in childcare at the same time was cost prohibitive for us. And so instead of having both of us working in be part of the economy, one of us was always staying home to provide childcare because alternatively, one of us would have just been working just to pay childcare. So commend the $10 a day initiative. It's a real affordability piece for people across this province, for young families across this province, so that's great to see. But I just want to highlight before I cede the floor, we've heard from a number of childcare providers here in this assembly. They've come into the gallery, a couple of them a number of times, to speak about the issues and struggles that they're having. So I'd like to just highlight, Nicole Kessel was here. She's the director of Wiggles and Giggles in Whitewood. And Nicole has come to the ledge twice now, and her child care center is now closed because hasn't been able to adjust to the government's changes and how they have rolled out the $10 a day child care. We have Antoinette Harris who came to the ledge as well and said, I need a timeline so I can plan my business. This is a Regina daycare owner, Mr. Speaker. And so there are serious issues here with how this is being rolled out. I hope that the government will take this on in a serious and thoughtful way, because that hasn't seemed to be the way they've done it up till this point. But I hope for Saskatchewan families, for young Saskatchewan families, that the government does do this better than they have. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will move to adjourn debate on Bill 143. Thank you.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill number 143. Is that agreed? Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 6, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 144, the Police Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Witherspoon.
I recognize the member from Regina Newtown. Oh, excuse me.
That was close enough. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just for the record, the member for Saskatoon, Newtana, pronouns she, her. It is my pleasure to rise in debate on Bill number 144, the Police Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2023. Well, this marshal service has received considerable debate in the Assembly leading up to this next phase in its development, where this act is laying out the duties of the head of the service, who will be called the Chief Marshal, and make some important provisions in place that do raise some questions, those being that the Serious Incident Response Team head can waive or block Public Complaints Commission sharing and copying of complaints if it's under a CERT investigation, that the head can't share investigation files that are under consideration of the Auditor General. And if the Auditor General is considering a report that CERT's usual 3-month deadline to publish summary starts from the day the Auditor General, its consideration has concluded. So these kinds of provisions do raise some questions, I would say. But I suppose above and beyond that, we're not really seeing a clear and compelling reason why we need this marshal service at all. And and when we see these kinds of provisions, it does also point to those greater concerns around transparency and accountability regarding issues that come forward to the Public Complaints Commission. Certainly, we've seen other cases where police members have come under investigation, and the need for separation when those reviews occur, and that there's both clear objectivity and perception of not just the structural, but also the perceived objectivity as well. And I think that we're seeing with this legislation concerns around how that objectivity will be maintained, and how, when complaints come forward, that they won't be under undue influence. I did note in the minister's introduction of the bill that the legislation expressly prohibits the minister from providing direction respecting investigations, the conduct of operations, the discipline of members, or the day-to-day administration, and that there will be an advisory council established to advise the minister on the minister's powers and duties. And I mean, certainly we only have to look to what happened in Alberta, where the premier there was meddling in police affairs in a very concerning manner. And so certainly, I mean, that is where our concerns rest here, in terms of how will a police marshal service be able to ensure that separation is maintained, that there isn't undue influence, and that there is a proper separation between the work of this police force and the ministry to which it reports. But I guess I feel like I've kind of gotten down into the nitty-gritty of this without sort of stepping back and just mentioning also that there still remains to this day, after all of the inquiry, all the questioning that has occurred to this point, as to there being a legitimate need for this service or a gap that it's filling. What we're seeing here is another layer of policing that will continue to see existing police services continue to go unfunded and unsupported. It is a marshal service that came forward without consultation of those said police forces or the experts who work in community safety and crime reduction. It seems as though this government simply felt that they needed to come in with a heavy hammer as a way to demonstrate that to the public that they were taking a concerted action, when in fact what we're going to see here is a misuse of government funds to fund another layer with added bureaucracy and create the opportunity for gaps and the lack of coordination between services. And at the end of the day, will that really result in crime reduction and safer communities for Saskatchewan people? We've been very clear on this side of the House that we do not support the Marshal Service, that we would like to see funding increased for our existing police services and more money put into the root causes of crime, whether that be for mental health and addictions, evidence-based harm reduction that this government across the way continues to ignore and evade, while at the same time continuing to raise taxes and fees, utility rates, and starve our crowns. So yet again, we see just another glaring example of a government that is mismanaging funds and not providing evidence-based solutions to addressing real issues that are facing Saskatchewan people. I'll also say finally that we did see a resolution that came forward at the SARM convention last week, also calling for the scrapping of this unnecessary and unproven service because it is not cost effective. Money could be better spent where we have contribution from federal dollars into our RCMP services. This Marshall Police Service is going to have to be funded 100% by the 1.2 million ratepayers here in Saskatchewan, and so it's a gross misuse of public funds that will have no measurable benefit to the people of the province. I know that our critic for this area will have far more to say on this very important matter as the bill goes forward. So with that, I will move to adjourn debate on Bill number 144.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill 144. Is that agreed? Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 7. Resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 145, the Funeral and Cremation Services Legal Decision Maker Protection Amendment Act 2023. Mr. T.
I recognize the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honor to rise today and enter into the debate on Bill number 145, the Funeral and Cremation Services Legal Decision Maker Protection Amendment Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill rights what was a wrong in the legislation, and the Minister of Justice outlined that very well in her second reading speech, where the provision around authorized decision makers didn't account for situations where parents, the reality of many families today, frankly, unfortunately, parents are no longer together, they're not deciding together, they're not in agreement of what will happen to their child's remains. The legislation as it currently stands reverts to the oldest parent, Mr. Speaker. About a year ago, a woman came to my colleague's office, the member for Regina University, and my colleague invited me to a meeting with her. She's a woman whose 18-year-old son died tragically in a car accident, Mr. Speaker. And she learned about this provision in the legislation in what is the worst way possible, while dealing with the horrific experience of the death of her 18-year-old son. She also had to deal with her ex-partner, who there was a history, as she told us, of abuse in that relationship. They had been separated for quite a long time and hadn't really been communicating much up until the point of the death of their son. In fact, there was a restraining order at one point between the two of them. The son had been living at her house for a while, had recently moved out. In fact, all of his mailing address, his driver's license was still all pointing to her house, the mother's house. Upon the death of her son, though, when it came to the point of deciding on the funeral service, what was going to happen with her son's body, the funeral director made it very clear, and her ex made it very clear, that it was actually his decision to make, not hers, for the simple reason that he was older than her, because that's what the legislation provided. It was an absolutely horrible story that she took to our office, and we wrote a letter to the Minister of Justice outlining this issue and this provision in the legislation and how outdated it is. And much to the credit of the Minister of Justice, she wrote back right away and agreed and said that her office would look into this. And my heartfelt thanks goes to the Minister of Justice for taking that letter and taking this concern and coming forward with this legislation today. It needed to happen. I'm very happy to see it happen. We're all very happy to see it happen, because nobody should have to go through what that woman went through who came to my colleague's office that day. I don't think I have much more I want to say about this legislation right now, but I am looking forward to, at a later stage, having the opportunity to speak about this with officials at committee. I did want to take the time to thank the minister for her offices and her work on this. I was very happy to see this come forward. There are times when we're able to work together to push forward positive change for the people of Saskatchewan, and we don't highlight those times often enough, and this is one I think that should be highlighted, Mr. Speaker. So I wanted to take the opportunity in this adjourned debate to do that. So at this point in time, I am prepared now to move to adjourn debate on Bill number 145.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill number 145. Is that agreed? Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 8, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 146, the King's Bench Consequential Amendments Act 2023. Ms. Ritchie.
I recognize a member from Regina Coronation Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's my honor and pleasure to stand on debates on Bill 146, the King's Bench Consequential Amendment Act 2023. Well, with the passage of time, a lot of change is coming, and it's great that we are changing our amendment accordingly as well. These updates keep on coming. A good reminder how deeply backed into a legal code with Her Majesty was for so long. Looking into what's likely to be a century of king, wonder how our relationship to the law and the crown will change with the time. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our critic on Bill 146 will debate in detail after doing some research, and we'll get back to you, and we'll get back to the debate. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will adjourn the debate on Bill 146.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill number 146. Is that agreed? Carried.
Orders adjourn debates. Item number 9, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 148, the Film Content Information Act. Ms. Saar.
I recognize a member from Saskatoon, Newtown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Appreciate that recognition. It's a pleasure again to be on my feet final time this afternoon, weighing in on Bill number 148, the Film Content Information Act. So as I understand it, this is a bill that replaces the former Film and Video Classification Act 2016, which right there is sort of interesting because certainly the industry has seen a lot of evolution over the years as we've moved from viewing films in theaters, and then we started to have VCRs and the big debate around beta versus VHS. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm sure you remember those debates going back to the 80s and the growth of the good old days of the 80s, right? Yeah, those were actually, I would say those were kind of tough years. For those of us that remember them, there's a lot of inflation and high interest rates and the like at that time. It was difficult economic times for sure, and government on the opposite side certainly didn't improve things by any stretch, that's for sure. But I don't want to get distracted by the heckling coming from across the way. I wanted to talk about this Bill number 148, the Film Content Information Act, and the evolution since the 80s, and up until now, where we have sort of live streaming, the ability to download content off the internet, and all the issues around regulating pornography, and adult content and the like. And so I know that this bill is really focused on the classification of films and the identification of, the content warnings, whether those are for language or substance use, smoking, sex. Those are some of the typical ones you sort of see when you're looking at reviewing the classifications for movies here and now. And it's my understanding that this bill came about because of calls from the film industry around the administrative burden, the cost burden that they experience in classifying movies across the country and every province, and that one of the main features of this bill is the removal of that classification fee of $440, while also providing that content classification. I did find it interesting that there was mention made by the minister that that the legislation will still require that adult films be reviewed and approved by an entity authorized to approve adult films. Does raise some questions in my mind about how that authorized entity is, the rules around that entity, how it receives the guidance and direction for reviewing those films. I'm not really even sure at this point if that is, within the scope of this legislation, or if it has just been carried forward from the previous Film and Video Classification Act of 2016. But certainly that I think will be an important thing to be reviewing. As this bill goes forward, it's also so interesting that we've had a government here be responsive to theater owners and filmmakers from outside of the province when we saw so little regard when they cut the film tax credit however many years ago, and how that literally gutted the industry and sent that class of workers and professionals to have to leave the province, and it had a really negative effect on our bottom line. And so while of course we always applaud modernization of legislation to keep up with the state of our economy and moving technology, these kinds of forces always require us to update our legislation. Sometimes the devil can be in the details, so I know that the critic will be taking a very close look to ensure that the changes that are proposed in this legislation aren't having any unintended consequences, that that the intent is maintained, and I'll leave it to them to do that good work. So with that, I will conclude and move to adjourn debate on Bill number 148, the Film Content Information Act.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill 148. Is that agreed? Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 10, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 149, the Franchise Disclosure Act. Ms. Saar.
I recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to enter into debate on Bill number 149, the Franchise Disclosure Act. Good to see this legislation coming into effect, as we're the only Western province to not have a similar legislation. Hopefully there to protect franchisees as they endeavor to explore business opportunities in Saskatchewan. We, of course, on this side of the House, and I know on the other side too, but we definitely value the small business community across the province. It is the backbone to the Saskatchewan economy, and so whenever we can make sure that we are putting in legislation and protections to protect entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan, I think that's a good thing. We do have some questions around what kind of substantial protections are there for franchisees from, say, hard-to-detect, undisclosed irregularities in a franchise. So I think some questions still there. What are the options to rescind franchise agreements? Are they sufficient in protecting franchisees? So we will continue to engage with stakeholders across the province, looking into this act to make sure it does fulfill the need that franchisees are hoping for across the province, and make sure that it matches what other protections are there in other provinces. So with that, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will move to adjourn debate on Bill 149.
Hear, hear.
The member has moved to adjourn debate on Bill 149. I recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move that this House do now adjourn.
This House stands adjourned until tomorrow, Thursday, November 16th, 2023 at 10,000. Oh, what's that? Oh, sorry. Is the motion to adjourn accepted? Carried. Okay. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, November the 16th, 2023 at 10:00 hours.